In the year 1848, amid my trials as an isolated and overworked young mother, the disenfranchised daughter of a judge and the indignant wife of an abolitionist, I sat down to tea with a small group of Quaker women in Waterloo, New York. In their sympathetic presence, I poured out the torrent of my long-accumulating discontent with such vehemence and indignation that I stirred myself as well as the rest of the party to do and dare anything. Translating grievance into action, we, Jane Hunt, Martha Coffin Wright and her sister Lucretia Mott, Marianne McClintock and her adult daughters Elizabeth and Marianne, and I planned a convention to address women's rights, the first of its kind. In the oppressive July heat, 300 people came together in an abolitionist church in the bustling canal town of Seneca Falls to consider women's rights and women's wrongs. For 2 days, we addressed such issues as property law, divorce, custody, education, and equal pay for equal work, moral double standards, and, most controversially, the elective franchise. Taking the Declaration of Independence as our inspiration and model, we presented our declaration of sentiments, a challenge to our sires and sons to make good on the American promise of justice and equality. We hold these truths to be self-evident, we said, with the audacity of those who know the time for patience is over, that all men and women are created equal. 68 women and 32 men signed the document and in so doing launched a revolution. We called our endeavor timely, rational, and sacred. Our detractors called it a most insane and ludicrous farce that would set the world by its ears. And so it did. As you look to us, so we too look to the past, to brilliant intellectuals like Mary Wollstonecraft and Margaret Fuller, who challenged male assumptions of superiority. We turn to educators like Emma Willard and Mary Lyon, who instructed generations of capable and self-reliant girls. We drew on the courage of abolitionists like Charlotte Fortin, Maria Stuart, and Lucretia Mott, who called herself a radical of radicals and a heretic among heretics. It was she, gentle Quaker and belligerent non-resistant, who taught me never accept authority as truth, but seek truth as your authority. Her words were a revelation to me and brought form and purpose to the lingering sense of injustice I harbored from childhood. As a daughter of Judge Daniel Cady, I received an early education in the law's unequal applications. The women who sought my father's counsel were answered with cruel statutes that robbed them of their inheritance, wages, and even, most horribly, custody of their children and sovereignty over their bodies. I hatched a plan to cut those odious laws out of my father's law books. If my father, powerful as he was, could not help those poor women, then I would. Armed with my scissors, I could be a savior of women. To save his books, my father explained that the only way to excise unjust law was through legislation. When I was a grown woman, I must go to Albany, he said, and demand change. Poor man. How horrified he was when I grew to adulthood and took his advice. In the years after the Seneca Falls Convention, conventions across the nation drew women to our cause. But for every success, there were a dozen failures, and the vote remained beyond our reach. With Susan B. Anthony, the constant companion of my rebellion, I preached revolution across this vast nation, from crowded city lecture halls to tiny country churches. We spoke the truth as we understood it. When the demands of my large family forbade travel in person, I wrote speeches for her to deliver. I forged the thunderbolts and she fired them. Friends and family thought I'd lost my mind, and sometimes I agreed. Struggling to balance my role as mother and reformer, I cried out, "Men and angels, give me patience. I am at the boiling point. If I do not find someday the use of my tongue on this question, I shall die of an intellectual repression, a woman's rights convulsion." Somehow, between helping the boys with their schoolwork and nursing the baby, I found my voice. I demanded suffrage, education, professional opportunity, and equal pay for women. I declared that women must have the right of self-sovereignty, the right to divorce, and to limit the size of their families. At every turn, we met resistance from the institutions of church, state, and family. If there had been an obedient bone in my body, I may have stepped back from the fray, hurt by accusations of being a willful and wicked woman. But I did not accept the ancient lie that women are by their very nature the sinful daughters of Eve, any more than I believe that women are angels of the home. No, we are persons and citizens worthy of nothing short of equality. When they opened their Bibles to deny our demand for equality, Matilda Jocelyn Gage and I demanded an end to the interference of the church in secular affairs. We wrote the Woman's Bible, challenged religion itself, and welcomed the howls of outrage that followed. It is folly to talk of a just government and a pure religion in a nation where the state and the church alike sustain an aristocracy of wealth and ease, while those who do the hard work of the world have no share in the blessings and riches their continued labors have made possible for others to enjoy. Is it just that the many should ever suffer, that the few may shine? As I aged, I grew more radical. Younger women, themselves the beneficiaries of my radicalism, cautioned me to go slowly, to try not to offend. Even Susan B. Anthony grew exasperated with my refusal to settle all my attention on the vote. Go cautiously, they told me. There is only room for one revolution at a time. Let us remember, I said, that all reforms are interdependent, and that whatever is done to establish one principle on a solid basis strengthens all. Reformers who are always compromising have not yet grasped the idea. Truth is the only safe ground to stand upon. The object of an individual life is not to carry one fragmentary measure in human progress, but to utter the highest truth. Abigail Adams told her husband to remember the ladies. He thought it a joke. And we waited 72 long years before we found the opportunity and the courage to stand together in Seneca Falls. It was another 72 years before my granddaughter's generation secured the right to vote. And since then, a century has unfolded. A century of working for equal representation, for equal education, for equal opportunity, for equal pay. A century demanding the dignity of constitutionally protected citizenship that is our birthright. From the other side of history, I lay claim to a life lived in defiance of injustice, though I cannot claim that I never outran my guide or surrendered to the baser lure of expediency at my friend's expense. Frederick Douglass can tell you about that. The Civil War and its aftermath divided our movement just as it had divided our nation. I demanded the vote for all and was told that I must take my turn. Insulted and discouraged, my prejudices overshadowed my principles, and I resorted to the cheap and destructive tools of racism and elitism. I tarnished my reputation, but worse, I injured a comrade who had stood by me from the day he stood up in Seneca Falls to add his voice to mine in the demand for universal human rights. It would not be my last error. As we blundered forward through the heavy disappointments of time, there were many instances of hypocrisy, arrogance, and bitterness. It is more difficult to forgive our friends than our enemies, but my friendship with Frederick Douglass endured. As we drew to the end of our years, he remarked that though I had been not denied the rights of an American citizen on account of my sex, and he, on account of his color, he felt sure that we would stand on equal ground with the angels in heaven. I told him that I doubted that very much. As so many doors were closed against us on earth, I expected the gates of heaven to be closed to us as well. Then, he replied, hand in hand, we will go below. So there we stood as friends and equals, ready to brave hell itself, rather than accept a heaven without freedom. As you celebrate the generation of suffragists, reformers, and radicals I represent, remember, we who question all the powers of heaven and hell would not demand that you make icons of us. Certainly, we never mistook each other for angels. Wendell Phillips once said that to be as good as our fathers, we must be better. This is true of our mothers as well. It is not enough to celebrate what we accomplished in 1848 or in 1920. To be as good as us, you must be better. Whatever our mistakes, you are strong enough to right them. We do not need monuments or require your veneration. Do not let our authority be your truth, but test everything for yourselves. You will find that whatever was good in us is already written in your hearts. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. If that is our only legacy to you, it is enough.